Hey, how's it going everyone? It's me, it's Jinsula, and welcome to another Pokemon Go deep dive video. Today we'll be taking a look at the 3 legendary birds from the Kanto region, and try to determine which out of the 3 is the one you should power up. All 3 of these legendary Pokemon are powerful in their own right, but one of them definitely stands out among the rest. The point of this video will be to look at each legendary bird individually, and make the determination on where you should use each of them. Right, so with that said, let's roll the intro and get right into it. The Legendary Bird Trio are some of the most iconic sets of legendary Pokemon in the Pokemon franchise. Many players fondly look at these Pokemon as they were among the first legendary Pokemon that were ever introduced, but their usefulness and power level is going to vary depending on what form of gameplay you are engaged in. Some of these birds will be phenomenal for gyms and raids, while others are going to succeed in PvP. So in this video, I'll be going over each bird in detail and where exactly you should use them within Pokemon Go. The first of these birds is going to be Articuno. This ice and flying type Pokemon is more defensive compared to the other 2, which means it will be much more useful in the Go Battle League. Or at least, it should be in theory, but unfortunately it falls short. In terms of its stats, it has an attack stat of 192, a defense stat of 236, and a health stat of 207. Now among all 3 of the legendary birds, Articuno has the lowest attack stat, but it has the highest defense stat. It has weaknesses to electric types, fire types, steel types, and a double weakness to rock types. It has resistances to grass types, ground types, and bug types. This Pokemon is a quintessential Ice-type Pokemon, as it has plenty of really powerful and some of the most ideal Ice-type fast and charge attacks. It has the fast moves Frost Breath and Ice Shard, and the charge moves Ice Beam, Blizzard, Icy Wind, Hurricane, and Ancient Power. Now among all of these, I would suggest going with Frost Breath for that fast energy gain, and either Ice Beam or Icy Wind depending on what you will be using Articuno for. Ice Beam will be the best move to use if you're using Articuno in raids, but Icy Wind is going to be extremely useful in PvP, as it lowers the attack stat of your opponent. Now if you have a second charge attack unlocked, I suggest going with Hurricane for some type coverage, especially in the Go Battle League. Speaking of which, Articuno's top IVs for the Go Battle League will be 1 attack, 15 defense, and 14 health for the Great League, and 1 attack, 15 defense, and 15 health for the Ultra League. Something you need to keep in mind, however, is that Articuno doesn't rank really high in either of these leagues. There are plenty of really good ice types and flying types that would be much better than Articuno in PvP. However, this Pokemon could still prove to be useful if it is eligible for any specialty cups, so that is something you should consider. In all honesty, Articuno is probably best served in raid battles as an ice-type attacker, but more specifically its Shadow version, mainly because non-Shadow Articuno just doesn't deal enough damage compared to other ice types out there like Mamoswine and Mega Abomasnow. So, unfortunately, this is probably the least useful legendary bird among the 3. But next, let's move on to a more well-rounded Pokemon, and it is going to be Zapdos. This Pokemon has the electric and flying typing, and it is weak against only rock types and ice types. It also has resistances from a plethora of different types, such as grass, bug, flying, fighting, ground, and steel. Now I mentioned that Zapdos is the most well-rounded among the legendary birds, and that is true based on its stats. It has an attack stat of 253, a defense stat of 185, and a health stat of 207. Now these stats are not that amazing, but they are pretty balanced. Zapdos is defensive enough to survive most raids, while also high enough in attack stats to deal a respectable amount of damage. It also has some pretty decent moves that you can give it. For its fast moves, it will come with Charge Beam or Thunder Shock, which you can get with an elite fast TM as it is a legacy move. For its charge attacks, it can come with Thunderbolt, Zap Cannon, Drill Peck, Ancient Power, or Thunder. Now out of all of these moves, Thunder Shock is going to be the most ideal fast attack in just about every situation, and Thunderbolt and Drill Peck will be the most ideal charge attacks. Unfortunately, Zapdos doesn't come with the insanely good electric type charge attack, Wild Charge. Thus, it will fall off as a raid damage dealer compared to other electric types with that move. But you should still not ignore Zapdos, given that it does have pretty decent stats and some respectable electric type attacks. Even though it will not be top tier by today's standards, it is still a decent electric type raid attacker if you are still building your collection. Now when it comes to PvP, things get slightly different. Like Articuno, Zapdos is not a top tier Pokemon in either the Great League or the Ultra League by any means, but it does have more potential, and that is of course because of its flying type charge attack Drill Peck. This gives this Pokemon a lot of type coverage in some of the most unforgiving metas. It could be a sleeper in the Great League, one which not a lot of players will be prepared to go up against. While it won't be top tier, it's still somewhat decent and you shouldn't ignore it. Since it has very few weaknesses and a ton of resistances, it could actually prove useful in some circumstances where an electric type or flying type could excel. But we should face reality. Zapdos is, unfortunately, not going to be an ideal pick for PvP and raid battles, especially compared to what's out there. It just doesn't seem like the legendary birds have any staying power in any of the different gameplay aspects of Pokemon Go. But that leads me to the third and final legendary bird, and it is Moltres. Out of the three, this legendary bird might actually be the most useful, at least in terms of raid battles, Team Go Rocket battles, and gym battles. Now interestingly enough, Moltres is actually weaker on paper compared to Zapdos and Articuno, at least in terms of its stats. But it is probably the one legendary bird that you will still use to this day, and not a lot of Pokemon will replace it. So let me explain. Moltres is the fire type Pokemon among the three legendary birds, and it is pretty much one of the strongest glass cannons currently in the game. Now it should be noted that it actually has less attack stats and defense stats than Zapdos, but it has tremendous offensive power because of its moves. Moltres has an attack stat of 251, which is 2 less than Zapdos, a defense stat of 181, which is 4 less than Zapdos, and a health stat of 207, which is the same among all three legendary birds. Now let's get into its moves. It can come with the fast attacks Fire Spin and Wing Attack, and it has the charge attacks Overheat, Fire Blast, Heat Wave, Ancient Power, and the legacy move Sky Attack, which you can get with an Elite Charge TM. At this point, you may have noticed something that differentiates Moltres from the other two legendary birds. This is the only one out of the three that has a flying type fast attack, and that is pretty significant. While Moltres is iconically used as a fire type Pokemon, it is actually probably the most powerful flying type Pokemon in the game. Considering that its stats are pretty substantial, given that it is a legendary Pokemon, very few flying types exist that could rival Moltres in terms of flying type raid damage. This means that if you're going up against a raid boss that is specifically weak against flying, then Moltres might be your best bet. Sure, there are certain Pokemon that could outclass it, such as Mega Pidgeot, but since this Pokemon has an insane amount of resistances, it just might be the most efficient Pokemon you could have. And even though it is top tier as a flying type, it can still be a very powerful fire type Pokemon. While it may not have the TDO of a Pokemon like Entei or Reshiram, its status as a glass cannon makes it one of the highest DPS fire types in the game, especially if you take into consideration its shadow form. Thus, I would say it is pretty obvious that Moltres is the most useful out of the three legendary birds. It may not ever be useful in PvP, unfortunately, but it is without a doubt one of the best Pokemon for any kind of PvE content. It will be top tier for the foreseeable future when it comes to raids, gyms, and the Go Battle League, especially its shadow form. I would most certainly power up this Pokemon whenever you have the chance, especially because you will likely find yourself using it more than the other two birds. But yeah, there you have it. This was my deep dive into the three legendary birds in Pokemon Go. While I went over a lot of stats and data behind each of these Pokemon, I'm sure there are a few things that I missed when it comes to this deep dive. So let me know your thoughts. Which of these birds are your favorite? What has given you the best results? Let me know down below and let's have a great discussion. And if you ended up enjoying this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if it's your first time here. And don't forget that little bell so you stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. And I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons on Patreon. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support my channel in any way, then do consider checking out the links in the description below. For all of my patrons, they get a permanent spot on my in-game friends list, so if you want to interact with me in some way within Pokémon Go, then do consider joining me on Patreon. But yeah, that's going to be it. I'm Count Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch you all later.